from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave.
I hope that we recover as many service members as possible while we're here.
No man or woman will be left behind.
Tells us he spent roughly $100,000 per year for the past 30 years on maintenance and cattle losing weight from being chased around. Camouflage clothes stripped off by unknown people who've illegally crossed over the border and made their way into the interior of the U.S. Remnants like these are common findings for Ladd. His family has owned this land right on the border for 127 years.
And this is what they have to buy to get smuggled across the border. And then when they get here, they just dump it.
In this garage here, built in the 1930s, he's now having to tear down because of continuously finding illegal crossers spending the night. He shows us another storage space where illegal immigrants come to hide out. The former Border Patrol agent who lives in the house next door has responded to medical emergencies.
It's getting out to the freaking road. Vamos a parar. Párate, eh? We got cold water in the car.
Heat strokes like this are most common, happening a few times a month. And dead bodies are found now and again. Ladd says he knows of at least 16 people who have died on their ranch trying to make the trek. By the same token, illegal immigration is seen by some as a humanitarian gesture.
The humanitarian deal is just a ploy to socialize America, dumb down America, or make America a third world country, or putting them all over the interior of the U.S. New York's going to let non-citizens vote in local elections. Well, what do you think? Pretty soon it'll be the federal election.
Ladd tells us this is the factor that grips his heart the most, watching the fabric of America change.
Wait, one world order, one world economy? What is that? What the bottom line is? That's been going on for a long time, but it's certainly scary. I'm more scared of that than illegals, and I'm darn sure more scared of rattlesnakes than illegals too. But
he tells us he's concerned that administrations past and present haven't put forth a genuine effort at stemming the tide of illegal immigration.
That Trump's law was 20 million a mile, and I, like I said, I'm in favor of that, but it isn't beneficial unless you put boots on the ground, and so far that hasn't happened. So, but there've been a lot of money spent on it, and not very good results.
Hundreds of millions.
Classified and still be highly sensitive. So these guys know that there's prohibitions of working with foreign governments, and then in this particular instance, sharing our most sensitive information, classified or not. How we conduct these things, how we exercise and execute our tactics is still sensitive information, should not be shared.
In general, how is this different from, say, often countries train with each other? What's different about this?
The difference is that when we do train, it's done under the purview of mill-to-mill cooperation. RIMPAC is a really good example. In 2011, the U.S. sold upgraded parts to Taiwan, as we usually do as part of our agreement. And PRC terminated our mill-to-mill relationship in September of 2011. And then in January of 2012, as we were getting ready for RIMPAC, which is one of those exercises you're talking about, that's an officially sanctioned sharing of information, they had the gall to complain that they weren't allowed to come to RIMPAC in 2012 when they had canceled mill-to-mill relationships in 2011. And nobody in our government bothered to call them on that and make that point. So they scored another win saying, oh, yeah, the U.S. is treating us badly instead of trying to bring us into the fold and cooperate. You hear that word cooperation from China all the time, and you and I know perfectly well that cooperation is one-sided in this regard. And that's the biggest problem with what you're seeing in this particular case is, sometimes you can give to get, right? You share your stuff, and then you learn more about them in return. That's called reciprocity. there's never been reciprocity in these relationships.
In general, you mentioned earlier how this isn't a new thing, right? So how does this tie into Beijing's bigger picture of poaching foreign talent?
I just talked to somebody this week, and we were talking about innovation in authoritarian regimes versus friendly, countries like our own. And he had a good framework. He called it absorptive innovation and generative innovation. We do generative innovation. As a captain, I was allowed to go out there with my 4-ship of aircraft, create a tactic, and then try it out and see if it worked. And if it didn't work, go back and figure out why. But I was not restricted as to what I could do. And this is how we've developed so quickly in these tactics. The PRC can't do that. Their system just doesn't allow people to go out there and innovate and try out new things, which means that they would fall further and further and further behind, except that we're now giving away the score on this. So is it people are going to say, oh, you're being racist on this. No, it's a cultural thing. It's not race. Living in an authoritarian system, you're not allowed to think freely. If you think too freely, you begin asking hard questions like, why is there only one party here? Why can't I speak freely? Why don't we have democracy? Why is Xi Jinping going to get a life term as the chairman or the general secretary? These are all hard questions. They don't want their people asking these questions. So again, they prevent them from doing what other...
Going through that network on your phone and your computers is now susceptible, is actually being sent back to the Chinese Communist Party in massive data collection. And maybe the artificial intelligence isn't there today, but it certainly will be there in the next year or two to be able to sift through all the data that they've been collecting on every American company, and so on.
And Casey, it seems the argument is that when it comes to these big tech companies, they're private, so they don't fall under these government overreach rules. So given the case of TikTok, it also argues that it's not related to ByteDance. It's, Chinese parent company and it's safe and all that. So how do you deal with this then?
You have to understand that it's not safe. That's the party line that you're getting from these companies, whether they're American companies or whether they're CCP companies. You don't believe what you're being told. I mean, you can't believe what you're being told. What I typically tell people is you must assume any technology from China is weaponized against you and the free world and your children's future. You have to understand the Chinese Communist Party and their direction, their ideologies, and they're nothing like we have in the free world. They're completely opposite.
On the weaponization part, earlier you mentioned the terms unrestricted hybrid warfare. How would you describe that?
Caused prices to rise across the board, and seniors who are on fixed incomes right now, they are hurting. They are hurting because of Democrat policies. I run into people all the time. They say, I cannot afford my groceries, my drugs, my medicine that I need to put gas in my car. And that is because of what Democrats have done. And they own it. They own it. They're running away from it. And the voters are so smart. They're going to hold them accountable for this economy, which is a failing economy.
Okay, so if Republicans have great success, take the House, take the Senate, they can pass things, they can put things together. They're going to get vetoed on the president's desk. So how do you then make the argument, do Republicans make the argument going into 2024, if that's the scenario, that you guys are actually the party that can get something done?
Well, we do hold the power of the purse in the House, and the Democrats have shown their priorities with their voting. Instead of getting more Border Patrol agents, instead of getting more teachers for the kids who have deficits, instead of getting more police, they got 87,000 IRS agents. That's what they passed. So the House can stop that. And Joe Biden's always talked about how he wants to be unified and work across the aisle. Well, this is his chance, because this is going to be repudiation of the Democrat Party. They've had the reins for 2 years. And if Republicans have big wins, they better recognize they've got to come to the center and work with us on behalf of the American people. And that is exactly what we are laser focused on. How do we make lives better for the voters who are in desperate need for leadership in Washington, instead of this partisan disaster we're seeing with rising crime, rising inflation, open border, drugs coming across, and kids who are struggling from the Democrat Party.
Or anything for that matter. We then have this guy, high-ranked Chinese embassy official, Mr. Chen Yonling, who defected in Australia and exposed the real reason for the continued attack on Falun Gong. He stated, "The Chinese Communist Party has always relied on violence, lies, and advocating atheism to maintain its power. They cannot understand Falun Gong's peaceful efforts to protect their freedom of belief. Now, they can't let the international community know what they've done to Falun Gong in China. For what it's worth, if you want true information on Falun Gong, visit the Falun Gong website under this video or human rights organizations like Freedom House. And to all mainstream media journalists, no one can deny that the Communist Party's actions against people who practice Falun Gong are so terrible and so evil, they run counter to the proper nature of human beings. To align with good is to help stop these things from happening. To align with evil is to ignore these actions and further promote the suffering of these human beings by demeaning them as something to unmask. Instead, unmask the CCP and help those who are suffering under evil forces, regardless if you understand their spiritual faith or not. Don't make the promotion of evil your contribution to this world. Make the fight for good and justice your core value, because the universe keeps score, and the ultimate cost of ignorance or malice isn't worth it. I'm Joel Chipkar. See you next time.
Ban puberty blockers for children under 18. Board members say they decided on the ban because the drugs are irreversible and also because the number of detransitioners is growing. There's not much evidence available on the drug's long-term effects, and many is flawed. NTD's Arlene Richards reports.
In April 2021, Arkansas was the first state to prohibit doctors from providing minors with cross-sex treatments, including prescriptions for puberty blockers, hormone drugs, and surgeries. But in August, a federal appellate court affirmed a lower court ruling that temporarily blocked the law. Last week, a trial began in a case attempting to permanently block it. On October 17, Dr. Deanna Atkins, a North Carolina pediatric endocrinologist, testified in the case on behalf of the challengers. She spoke about young people suffering from gender dysphoria, a persistent distress over the sex of one's body. She shared anecdotal evidence that they frequently see dramatic improvement in their distress after getting treatments. Dr. Jay Green, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, authored a report titled Puberty Blockers, Cross-Sex Hormones, and Youth Suicide. In it, he states lowering legal barriers to make it easier for minors to undergo cross-sex medical interventions without parental consent does not reduce suicide rates. So how does cross-sex medical interventions, in other words, drugs or surgery, reduce the risk of suicide in adolescents?
Well, so it doesn't. Actually, we find that those interventions exacerbate suicide risk among young people. At the heart of this all really are that there are underlying mental health problems that need to be addressed. And if we give people false interventions that don't really address their problems, then we actually leave them at risk for suicide.
He said, unsurprisingly, youths who don't qualify for the procedures due to mental instability later report greater mental health problems. In his report, Green says the use of cross-sex hormones for adolescents was very limited before 2010. But do you know what happened in 2010 that caused this sudden uptick or burst of use of these drugs, or even for teens to actually want them?
Sure. So the first gender clinic in the United States opened in Boston in 2007. And so there was very small amount of use of these drugs for the purpose of treating gender dysphoria around then. And the gender clinics began to spread to other parts of the country so that by 2010, it began to be a thing across the country where there were gender clinics prescribing these drugs for the treatment of gender dysphoria. It ramped up dramatically around 2015.
He said gender dysphoria treatment is a phenomenon that became widespread after Caitlyn Jenner's transition became big news. In my next report, I continue my conversation with Dr. Green. Among other things, he will explain why psychiatrists are reluctant to treat underlying mental health problems. Arlene Richards, NTD.
The next presidential election. And they're not making a secret of it.
Okay, so take that along with this headline from Newsweek. Democrats spent $43 million helping election deniers win their primaries. If it backfires, the Democrats will have to shoulder some of the blame for helping those far-right candidates into office. So aren't Democrats now contributing to kind of this conversation about election denying, stealing elections that you guys have said you condemn?
Well, Shannon, look, those are both things I'm unfamiliar with. I do know that there are folks in my party really concerned about the mechanics of elections, about folks running for office in states like Arizona and Nevada who deny that Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential and who are running saying that they won't accept the results of an election with which they disagree. I think all of us in the wake of this attack on Paul Pelosi need to say that we are going to stop demonizing folks because I think those kinds of the sort of rhetoric that we've heard in too many ways in too many places can lead to
prices to rise across the board, and seniors who are on fixed incomes right now, they are hurting. They are hurting because of Democrat policies. I run into people all the time. They say, I cannot afford my groceries, my drug, my medicine that I need to put gas in my car. And that is because of what Democrats have done. And they own it. They own it. They're running away from it. And the voters are so smart. They're going to hold them accountable for this economy, which is a failing economy.
Okay, so if Republicans have great success, take the House, take the Senate, they can pass things, they can put things together. They're going to get vetoed on the president's desk. So how do you then make the argument? Do Republicans make the argument going into 2024, if that's the scenario, that you guys are actually the party that can get something done?
Well, we do hold the power of the purse in the House, and the Democrats have shown their priorities with their voting. Instead of getting more Border Patrol agents, instead of getting more teachers for the kids who have deficits, instead of getting more police, they got 87,000 IRS agents. That's what they passed. So the House can stop that. And Joe Biden's always talked about how he wants to be unified and work across the aisle. Well, this is his chance because this is going to be repudiation of the Democrat Party. They've had the reins for 2 years. And if Republicans have big wins, they better recognize they've got to come to the center and work with us on behalf of the American people. And that is exactly what we are laser focused on. How do we make lives better for the voters who are in desperate need for leadership in Washington instead of this partisan disaster we're seeing with rising crime, rising inflation, open border, drugs coming across, and kids who are struggling from the Democrat Party.
Has anyone ever heard of the anti-capitalist media? Oh, that sounds like communist China media to me. See, this is what people are getting convinced that it's Trump's fault that our goddamn economy is in the ditch. But we all know that's not true. I know too many people who are making good money.
He's personal friends with Nicolás Maduro, the socialist dictator in Venezuela. He's personal friends with Daniel Ortega, the socialist dictator in Nicaragua. So we have to remember we're dealing with a candidate, we're dealing with a president-elect that has traditionally been calling for a sort of animosity against the U.S. and for a so-called South-South relationship with Russia and China. So Brazil is likely to shift ever more towards China and Russia in the long run and be ever less friendly to the U.S. in the long run. And I think that's brave because now from the southern tip of South America up to the Mexico border with the United States, almost every single country in the region is leaning hard left. I'll tell you why that's important. Brazil is the 4th largest producer of food in the world. It's one of the 10 largest economies. And we have been talking recently about a looming food crisis. So this major power, this major regional power is now shifting away from U.S. interests ever more, as is the whole region. And then, of course, all the regimes I just mentioned, socialist Venezuela, socialist Nicaragua, communist Cuba, they have been working to flood the U.S. basically with migrants and drugs towards the southern border. Now, with this regional powerhouse that is Brazil, can you imagine the power to have to wage unconventional warfare against the U.S.? I think those are some of the main implications, strategic with China and also the southern border.
To seek permission for a law-abiding citizen to carry a firearm. Now, we as a society don't get to pick and choose which of our rights in the Constitution are more worthy of protecting than another. End of quote.
So it seems to me that Democrats don't believe in the First or the Second Amendment. Those are the first two amendments in our Constitution. On the issue of racializing everything, listen to the examples that Tulsi quotes here.
Democrats were completely silent in the face of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's blatant racist policy of only accepting interviews with reporters of color because she was struck with the, quote, overwhelming whiteness and maleness. Modern-day segregation in schools is being promoted by racial profiteers like Robin DiAngelo and the corrupt, self-identified cultural Marxists who lead Black Lives Matter. Where's the Democratic Party of today stand on that? Well, they embrace these people and their ideology and celebrate their racist agenda. They support programs that are teaching our kids in public schools that they are either the privileged or the victims, the oppressors or the oppressed, solely because of the color of their skin. They have become the racists that they claim to hate.
They have become the racists that they claim